We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
When we started on our drive, the sun was shining brightly on Munich. Just as we were about to depart, Herr Delbruck came down bareheaded to the carriage, and after wishing me a pleasant drive, said to the coachman, "Remember, you are back by nightfall. The sky looks bright, but there is a shiver in the north wind that says there may be a sudden storm. But I am sure you will not be late, for you know what night it is." Johann answered with an emphatic "Ja, mein Herr," and drove off quickly. When we had cleared the town, I asked, "Tell me, Johann, what is tonight?" He crossed himself as he answered, "Walpurgisnacht." Then he took out his watch, a great old-fashioned German silver thing as big as a turnip, and looked at it. He started off rapidly as if to make up for lost time. Every now and then the horses seemed to throw up their heads and sniff the air suspiciously. As we drove, I saw a road that looked but little used, and which seemed to dip through a little winding valley. It looked so inviting that, even at the risk of offending him, I told Johann I would like to drive down that road. He made all sorts of excuses and frequently crossed himself as he spoke. This somewhat piqued my curiosity, so I asked him various questions. He answered fencingly and repeatedly looked at his watch in protest. Finally, I said, "Well, Johann, I want to go down this road. I shall not ask you to come unless you like, but tell me why you do not like to go. That is all I ask." For answer, he stretched out his hands appealingly to me and implored me not to go. There was just enough of English mixed in with the German for me to understand the drift of his talk. He seemed always just to tell me something, the very idea of which evidently frightened him, but each time he pulled himself up, saying as he crossed himself, "Walpurgisnacht." Then the horses became restless and sniffed the air. At this, he suddenly jumped forward, took them by the bridles, and led them on some 20 feet. I asked why he had done this. For answer, he crossed himself, pointed to the spot we had left, and drew his carriage in the direction of the other road, indicating a cross, and said, first in German, then in English, "Buried him what killed themselves." I remembered the old custom of burying suicides at crossroads, but for the life of me I could not make out why the horses were frightened. Whilst we were talking, we heard a sort of sound between a yelp and a bark. It was far away, but the horses got very restless, and it took Johann all his time to quiet them. He was pale and said, "It sounds like a wolf, but yet there are no wolves here now." "No?" I said. "Wasn't it long since the wolves were so near the city?" "Long, long," he answered. "In the spring and summer, but with the snow, the wolves have been here not so long." Whilst he was petting the horses and trying to quiet them, dark clouds drifted rapidly across the sky. The sunshine passed away, and a breath of cold wind seemed to drift past us. It was only a breath, however, and more in the nature of a warning than a fact, for the sun came out brightly again. Johann looked under his lifted hand at the horizon and said, "The storm of snow, he comes before long time." Then he looked at his watch again, and straightway, holding his reins firmly, for the horses were still pawing the ground restlessly, he climbed to his box as though the time had come for proceeding on our journey. I felt a little obstinate and did not at once get into the carriage. "Tell me," I said, "about this place where the road leads," and I pointed. Again he crossed himself and mumbled a prayer before he answered. "It is unholy." "What is unholy?" I inquired. "Der village." "Then there is a village?" No one lives there hundreds of years." My curiosity was piqued. "But you said there was a village." "There was." "Where is it now?" Upon this, he burst out into a long story in German and English, so mixed up that I could not quite understand exactly what he said, but roughly I gathered that long ago, hundreds of years, men had died there and been buried in their graves, and sounds were heard under the clay, and when the graves were opened, men and women were found rosy with life, and their mouths red with blood. And so, in haste to save their lives and their souls, those who were left fled away to other places, where the living lived and the dead were dead and not. He was evidently afraid to speak the last words. Finally, in an agony of desperation, he cried, "Walpurgis Nacht," and pointed to the carriage for me to get in. All my English blood rose at this, and standing back, I said, "You are afraid, Johann. You are afraid. Go home. I shall return alone. The walk will do me good." I took up my oak walking stick and said, "Go home, Johann. Walpurgis Nacht doesn't concern Englishmen." The horses were now more restive than ever, and Johann was trying to hold them in while excitedly imploring me not to do anything so foolish. After giving a direction, home, I turned to go down the crossroad and into the valley. With a despairing gesture, Johann turned his horses towards Munich. I leaned on my stick and looked after him. He went slowly along the road for a while. Then there came over the crest of the hill a man, tall and thin. I could see so much in the distance. When the man neared the horses, they began to jump and kick about, then to scream with terror. Johann could not hold them in. They bolted down the road, running away madly. I watched them out of sight, then looked for the stranger. But he too was gone. With a light heart, I turned down the side road through the deepening valley Johann had objected to. There was not a single reason that I could see for his objection, and I dare say I tramped for a couple of hours without thinking of time or distance, and certainly without seeing a person or a house. The ground I passed over was now much more picturesque. There were no striking objects that the eye might single out, but in all there was a charm of beauty. I took little heed of time, and it was only when the deepening twilight forced itself upon me that I began to think of how I should find my way home. The air was cold, and the drifting of clouds was more marked, and was accompanied by that mysterious cry which the driver had said came from a wolf. I hesitated. I had said I would see the deserted village, so on I went, and presently came on a wide stretch of open country shut in by hills all around. I followed with my eye the winding of the road and saw that it curved close to one of the densest clumps of trees and was lost behind it. As I looked, there came a cold shiver in the air, and snow began to fall. I thought of the miles and miles of bleak country I had passed, and then hurried on to seek the shelter of the wood in front. Darker and darker grew the sky, and faster and heavier fell the snow, till the earth before and around me was a glistening white carpet. The road here was but crude, and in a little while I found that I must have strayed from it, for I missed underfoot the hard surface, and my feet sank deeper in the grass and moss. Then the wind grew stronger and blew with an ever-increasing force, till I was fain to run before it. The air became icy cold, and in spite of my exercise, I began to suffer. The snow was now falling so thickly and whirling around me in such rapid eddies that I could hardly keep my eyes open. Every now and then, the heavens were torn asunder by vivid lightning. I was soon amongst the shelter of the trees, and there, in comparative silence, I could hear the rush of the wind high overhead. Presently, the blackness of the storm had become merged in the darkness of the night. By and by, the storm seemed to be passing away. It now only came in fierce puffs and blasts. At such moments, the weird sound of the wolf appeared to be echoed by many similar sounds around me. Now and again came a straggling ray of moonlight, which lit up the expanse and showed me that I was at the edge of a dense mass of cypress and yew trees. As the snow had ceased to fall, I walked out from the shelter and began to investigate more closely. It appeared to me that amongst so many old foundations, as I passed, there might be still standing a house in which, though in ruins, I could find some sort of shelter for a while. As I skirted the edge of the copse, I found that a low wall encircled it, and following this, I presently found an opening. Here the cypresses formed an alley, leading up to a square mass of some kind of building. I stopped, for there was a sudden stillness. The storm had passed, and perhaps in sympathy with nature's silence, my heart seemed to cease to beat. Suddenly, the moonlight broke through the clouds, showing me that I was in a graveyard, and that the square object before me was a great massive tomb of marble, as white as the snow that lay all around it. With the moonlight, there came a fierce sigh of the storm, which appeared to resume its course with a long, low howl, as of many dogs or wolves. I approached the sepulchre to see what it was, and why such a thing stood alone in such a place. I walked around it and read over the Doric door in German, Countess Dollingen of Graz in Styria, sought and found death, 1801. On the top of the tomb, seemingly driven through the solid marble, was a great iron spike or stake. On going to the back, I saw graven in great Russian letters, "The dead travel fast." I began to wish for the first time that I had taken Johann's advice. Here a thought struck me which came under almost mysterious circumstances and with a terrible shock. This was Walpurgisnacht, Walpurgis night, when, according to the belief of millions of people, the devil was abroad, when the graves were opened and the dead came forth and walked. This very place the driver had specially shunned. This was the depopulated village of centuries ago. This was where the suicide lay, and this was the place where I was alone, unmanned, shivering with cold in a shroud of snow, with a wild storm gathering again upon me. And now the ground shook as though thousands of horses thundered across it. And this time the storm bore on its icy wings not snow, but great hailstones, hailstones that beat down leaf and branch and made the shelter of the cypresses of no avail. At first I had rushed to the nearest tree, but I was soon fain to leave it and seek the only spot that seemed to afford refuge, the deep Doric doorway of the marble tomb. There, crouching against the massive bronze door, I gained a certain amount of protection from hailstones. As I leaned against the door, it moved slightly and opened inwards. The shelter of even the tomb was welcome in that pitiless tempest, and I was about to enter it when there came a flash of forked lightning that lit up the whole expanse of the heavens. In an instant, as I am a living man, I saw, as my eyes were turned into the darkness of the tomb, a beautiful woman with rounded cheeks and red lips, seemingly sleeping on a bier. As the thunder broke overhead, I was grasped as by the hand of a giant and hurled out into the storm. The whole thing was so sudden that before I could realize the shock, moral as well as physical, I found the hailstones beating me down. At the same time, I had a strange, dominating feeling that I was not alone. I looked towards the tomb. Just then, there came another blinding flash, which seemed to strike the iron stake that surmounted the tomb and to pour through to the earth, blasting and crumbling the marble as in a burst of flame. The dead woman rose for a moment of agony, and her bitter scream of pain was drowned in the thunder crash. The last thing I heard was this mingling of dreadful sound, as again I was seized in the giant grasp and dragged away, while the hailstones beat on me and the air around seemed reverberant with the howling of wolves. Gradually, there came a sort of vague beginning of consciousness, then a sense of weariness that was dreadful. This period of semi-lethargy seemed to remain a long time, and as it faded away, I must have slept or swooned. Then came a sort of loathing, like the first stage of seasickness, and a wild desire to be free from something, I knew not what. A vast stillness enveloped me, as though all the world were asleep or dead, only broken by the low panting as of some animal close to me. I felt a warm rasping at my throat. Then came a consciousness of the awful truth, which chilled me to the heart. Some great animal was lying on me and now licking my throat. I feared to stir, for some instinct of prudence bade me lie still, but the brute seemed to realize that there was now some change in me, for it raised its head. Through my eyelashes, I saw above me the two great flaming eyes of a gigantic wolf. Its sharp white teeth gleamed in the gaping red mouth, and I could feel its hot breath fierce and acrid upon me. For another spell of time, I remembered no more. Then I became conscious of a low growl, followed by a yelp, renewed again and again. Then, seemingly very far away, I heard a "Halloa! Halloa!" as of many voices calling in unison. Cautiously, I raised my head and looked in the direction whence the sound came, but the cemetery blocked my view. The wolf still continued to yelp in a strange way, and a red glare began to move round the grove of cypresses as though following the sound. As the voices drew closer, the wolf yelled faster and louder. I feared to make either sound or motion. Then, all at once, from beyond the trees, there came at a trot a troop of horsemen bearing torches. The wolf rose from my breast and made for the cemetery. I saw one of the horsemen, soldiers by their caps and military cloaks, raise his carbine and take aim. A companion knocked up his arm, and I heard the ball whiz over my head. He had evidently taken my body for that of the wolf. Another sighted the animal as it slunk away, and a shot followed. Then, at a gallop, the troop rode forward, some towards me, others following the wolf as it disappeared. 2 or 3 of the soldiers jumped from their horses and knelt beside me. One of them raised my head and placed his hand over my heart. "Good news, comrades," he cried. "His heart still beats." Then some brandy was poured down my throat. It put vigor into me, and I was able to open my eyes fully and look around. I heard men call to one another. "Well, have you found him?" The reply rang out hurriedly. No, come away, quick. This is no place to stay, and on this of all nights." "What was it?" was the question, asked in all manner of keys. It indeed," gibbered one. "A wolf, and yet not a wolf," another put in shudderingly. "No use trying for him without the sacred bullet," a third remarked in a more ordinary manner. "Serve us right for coming out on this night. We have earned our 1,000 marks." "There was blood on the broken marble," another said after a pause. "As for him, is he safe? Look at his throat. See, comrades, the wolf has been lying on him and keeping his blood warm." The officer looked at my throat and replied, "He is all right. The skin is not pierced. We should never have found him but for the yelping of the wolf." "What became of it?" asked the man who was holding up my head. "It went to its home," answered the man. "Comrades, come quickly. Let us leave this cursed spot." The officer raised me to a sitting posture as he uttered a word of command. Then several men placed me upon a horse, and we rode away in swift military order. The next thing I remember was finding myself standing up, supported by a soldier on each side of me. It was almost broad daylight, and to the north, a red streak of sunlight was reflected like a path of blood over the waste of snow. The officer was telling the men to say nothing of what they had seen, except that they had found an English stranger guarded by a large dog. "Dog, that was no dog," cut in one man. "I think I know a wolf when I see one." The young officer answered calmly, "I said a dog." "Dog," reiterated the other. "Look at his throat. Is that the work of a dog, sir?" Instinctively, I raised my hand to my throat, and as I touched it, I cried out in pain. The men crowded round to look, but again there came the calm voice of the young officer. "A dog, as I said. If aught else were said, we should only be laughed at." I was then mounted behind a trooper, and we rode on into the suburbs of Munich. When we arrived, Herr Delbruck rushed so quickly down the steps to meet me that it was apparent he had been watching. He solicitously led me in. The officer saluted me and was turning to withdraw when I insisted that he should come to my rooms. Over a glass of wine, I warmly thanked him and his brave comrades for saving me. He replied simply that he was more than glad, and that Herr Delbruck had at the first taken steps to make all the searching party pleased. "But Herr Delbruck," I inquired, "how and why was it that the soldiers searched for me?" He shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I was so fortunate as to obtain leave from the commander of the regiment in which I served to ask for volunteers." "But how did you know I was lost?" I asked. "The driver came thither," he said. "But surely you would not send a search party of soldiers merely on his account?" "Oh, no," he answered. "I had this telegram from the boyar whose guest you are," and he took from his pocket a telegram which he handed to me. I read, "Be careful of my guest. His safety is most precious to me. Should aught happen to him, or if he be missed, spare nothing to find him and ensure his safety. He is English and adventurous. There are often dangers from snow and wolves and night. Lose not a moment if you suspect harm to him. I answer your zeal with my fortune. Signed, Dracula.